Okay, so you should have already, hopefully, done the U4L1 notes and copied that diagram onto a piece of paper. You are going to have at least 5 or 6, I need to remember, of those diagrams for different shapes. This whole unit is about parallelograms, which are a special type of quadrilateral. Again, that was on the notes. Quadrilaterals, quad, are 4-sided shapes. Parallelograms, the most important thing that makes a parallelogram is that opposite sides are parallel. That's why this is called a parallelogram. So I'm going to make a parallelogram here by making opposite sides parallel. So let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this one. That's duplicated. So now it's parallel. It's the exact same line. And I'm going to duplicate this one so that we got some parallel lines up here. So this is a parallelogram. So I'm going to go ahead and group this and make this bigger. Sorry, I didn't connect all the sides, but whatever. Okay, so opposite sides are parallel. This is true because they're the exact same line. I just copied them. We have opposite sides are congruent as well. So opposite sides meaning across from each other. These two are going to be the exact same length. And then we also have that these two would be the exact same length. Come on, don't do this to me. There we go, we got a fat one, whatever. Opposite sides are parallel. These are opposite sides. These are opposite sides. Sorry, parallel and congruent. Exact same. Meaning if this is 5 inches, this is also 5 inches. If this one's 3 inches, this is also 3 inches. Opposite sides are congruent. So we've got those two. Now we have opposite angles are congruent. So this is just special things about parallelograms. Opposite angles means if you cut through the middle of the parallelogram, those angles on opposite corners are congruent. So this angle would be congruent to this one. Those are opposite through the parallelogram. And then these ones are congruent as well, opposite through the parallelogram. Now we also have this fact here that the diagonals bisect each other. Remember, bisect means cut into 2 equal pieces, cut in half. So if I were to draw the diagonals, here's what would happen. Here is one diagonal. Diagonals mean connecting the 2 corners. Here's another diagonal. Those are the diagonals of this picture. If they bisect each other, that means each is cut in half. So this is the 2 halves of the one diagonal. Here's one half. Here's the other half. They're congruent to each other. And here's the other diagonal, and it's 2 equal pieces. This half congruent to this half. So we have that as well. Now the last thing we have is that consecutive angles are supplementary. So consecutive are angles that are on the same side of the parallelogram. All of those are examples of consecutive angles. If they touch the same side, those are what we would call consecutive. And supplementary means they add up to what? 180, right? So these 2 angles would add to 180, these 2 angles would add to 180, so forth and so on. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to attack these problems using these properties. Using these properties, if we know one part of a parallelogram, we can find the other part. Because some things are congruent, some things are supplementary, we can use that information. So here's how we do this actually. Let me go ahead and write one more thing out. In any of these questions throughout this whole unit, there are 3 things we're going to talk about. Sides, angles, or diagonals. What you're going to do with these questions is identify which piece is being talked about. We're going to refer to our properties to see what properties we have about that piece, and then we're going to use the information and go from there. So let's go ahead and try this. Again, we have sides, angles, and diagonals. I do want you to write that down. The pieces we're looking at, write this down on your notes here. We have sides, we have angles, and then we have diagonals. We need to determine as our first step which piece is being talked about. Let's go ahead and look at these. Okay, so again, we're going to be given a piece. We're given 2 pieces actually here. We're given that HJ is 8 and that HL is 6. We need to determine what piece is given to us? Is that a side of the parallelogram, an angle, or a diagonal? Those are sides, right? These four right here, those are my sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look back to my properties and look at which properties I have that say anything about sides. Well, I've got this one and I've got this one. So now I need to see how are those going to be useful to me. Well, the first one says that opposite sides are parallel. Well, that just tells me that they're parallel. It doesn't tell me anything else. But this one says opposite sides are congruent. So looking back here, if I'm trying to find JK, which is here, and I'm trying to find LK, which is here, well, again, I'm given sides and I'm looking for sides. And based on the properties we just wrote down, we know that opposite sides are congruent. So if I want to find JK, look at the side that JK is opposite to. JK is opposite to which side? HL. So those are the opposite sides. They are congruent. Therefore, JK is 6. Super easy. The answer is there, right? Exact same thing with HJ. HJ is 8, and I want to find LK. Well, those are opposite sides, so they're congruent. They're equal. So what should LK equal? 8. Opposite sides are congruent. 8, 8, 6, 6. Let's try the next one. So again, step 1, determine what piece you're looking at. What is this? Something L equals 20 degrees. What piece is that? That's an angle. So I'm going to look back to my properties. Every single time, this is how you do this, guys. You determine the piece you're looking at. You look back to your properties, excuse me, and don't erase them, hopefully. And we find the properties that have that piece. We've got one property that has angles and 2 properties that have angles. We have to determine which one we need to use. So we know that angle L here, this whole thing, is 20 degrees. That's the entire angle. Yes, there's a line going through it. We're talking about the whole thing. We're trying to find angle J and angle H. I'm going to go ahead and erase this info here. Let's find angle J and angle H. Where are they? Well, here's angle J and here's angle H. So I'm actually going to be using both of these properties because one of these angles is opposite the 20 degrees and one is consecutive on the same side. So let's look at angle J. Here's angle J. Here's the 20 degrees we're given. Is J opposite to that or consecutive? Opposite. They are through the parallelogram. Those are considered opposite angles across from each other. So let's look back. What do we know about opposite angles? They are congruent. So if this angle is 20, this angle also equals 20. These are opposite angles. They are congruent. Looking at the H now, though, H and L, I can circle a side of the parallelogram. Those are consecutive. And let's look back to what consecutive angles are. Consecutive angles are supplementary, which means they add up to 180. So 20 plus angle H equals 180. Try and solve for angle H. Well, we know we're just going to subtract. I hope you guys get faster at this from here on. We know that H plus 20 equals 180. If I go 180 minus 20, well, then I can solve for angle H right away. Again, the reason why we added these to 180 is because they were consecutive angles right on top of each other on the same side of the parallelogram versus opposite angles. Opposite angles congruent, consecutive angles supplementary. Okay, now the last one we have here, and then you guys are just going to try this all the way on your own. Look at what we're given. We have HM equals 4. Here's HM. We are trying to find MK. So now this is a piece of one of our pieces, but what is being labeled here? A side, an angle, or a diagonal? These are diagonals. Now again, it's a piece of a diagonal, but they are diagonals. So we're going to look back to our properties, and we are going to look for any that talk about diagonals, and there is only one. The diagonals bisect each other is the only property we have. So let's look back here. This diagonal is cut in half. That the full diagonal is cut in half, and I know that 1/2 is 4. What does the other half have to be? 4 as well. If this entire diagonal is cut in half and this is half, this is also the exact same thing. 4 and 4, 8 is cut in half. So that's the process. You guys are going to try it all the way through one more time. Whoops, I want to fix that. That's 50 degrees. Refer to your properties. You need to say to yourselves, what piece is given? A side, an angle, or a diagonal? Look to your properties that you have about that piece and determine how to use them. Go ahead and try all 3 of these. Okay, let's bring it back. So we need to determine what piece is this. That is an angle. So I'm going to look, and that's right here. I'll just actually leave it real quick. This whole thing is 50 degrees, and I want to find angle D. So I'm going to look back to my properties. I have 2 properties about angles. Opposite angles are congruent, and consecutive angles are supplementary. So we need to look at the picture and determine, are these opposite angles or consecutive? What do we think? Are those opposite or consecutive angles? Consecutive, if they're on the same side, one right after the other, those are consecutive. So this means they add to 180. Consecutive angles add to 180 degrees. So to find angle D, if angle D plus 50 equals 180, if I go 180 minus 50, this would give me angle D. Consecutive angles add to 180. Let's try the next one. Same thing. We're going to determine the piece. Look at our properties. We have that BD is 10. Let's find BD. Now this one's a bit trickier. BD is this whole thing. I hope you're able to think this through. We are looking for BE, which is just right here. We know the whole thing is 10. I want just this piece. So what you should have determined is, what piece is this given to us? A diagonal. This is a diagonal. And the only property we have about diagonals is that they bisect each other. They're cut in half. So if this whole diagonal is cut in half, BE is just 1/2. So BE should have been 5. Hopefully you got that. That one was trickier. And last one, same thing. We determine this was again a diagonal. I want to write that. That's important. AD equals 12. Here's AD. That's 12. We are looking for BC. So what piece was this? Angle, diagonal, or sides? Sides. Those are sides of the parallelogram. All the way around the outside are the sides. So if AD equals 12, this is the opposite side to BC. Hey, look back here. Opposite sides are congruent. So if this equals 12, BC has to also equal 12. So in class, we're going to be doing some harder things because you guys are aware this is how geometry works. We start with vocabulary, we move to just numbers, and then we move to algebra. So we're going to practice some harder ones in class.